Hey everybody, I want to talk about a product and platform that I absolutely love and our latest sponsor, Interseller, the prospecting and outreach platform of choice for recruiters and sellers. Whether you're doubling down on business development or recruiting talent, Interseller does all the heavy lifting of finding contact data, automating the email and follow-up process, and syncs all that rich data into 20 plus CRM and ATS platforms. Reach out now and get going on a 2-week free trial and let them know you heard about it from Adam on the podcast today. Check out the link on the website. Appreciate it.
Welcome to the podcast, where we introduce you to incredible humans who share their journeys with the mission to inspire you to harness your own inner tenacity to drive your life and career forward. And now, your host, Adam Posner.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast, where I bring you the best and the brightest in the world of business, marketing, and entrepreneurship to help you harness your own inner tenacity and drive your career forward. My guest today on the podcast is Angela Antony, founder of Scalable. And Scalable is a platform of award-winning game technology that pairs job candidates with employers. Developed by Harvard and Stanford scientists, it translates in-game actions into real-world superpowers such as creativity, curiosity, and grit, all those things that we love to see. And prior to Scalable, Angela worked with the Whitehouse at the National Economic Council, studying, you guessed it, labor markets. She's worked in investments with Goldman Sachs, and Virgin. And Angela is through and throughout academic who has attended Harvard for a doctorate in law, MBA, and originally a BA in psychology. And I've had the pleasure to meet Angela in April in Miami and build a friendship and hang out at VCon. And again in June here up at NFT New York. And she has a ton to tell us about hiring, the labor market, and a little-known investor named Mark Cuban, who told her to start a company. So let's get to it. Angela, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Still with us?
I'm here.
Cool. Looks like we lost video, but we'll keep going there for a moment here. And it's always fun when I get to have folks on the show that I know personally and we built relationships. And you're just awesome. I just want to applaud you for your generosity of your time and your friendship.
Oh, well, I feel the same.
And if anybody wants to check out on our VCon coverage, I have a special exclusive first time only. We call it Escalator Sessions with Angela. So if you want to check out that fun, so it's actually your second time on the show, technically.
I guess that's true. Yeah. I was very happy to beta test that segment.
It was a little bit of improv there and we had fun and maybe we'll do it again in Miami in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm down.
We'll have Basel sessions. Is it Basel or Basel? What are the local? Is it our
Basel? Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to go with Basel there. So let's kind of jump into your story here and let's get to it. I'm not sure how well known this is, but to my understanding, you actually created a company, a gaming-based company prior to Scalable, right? Called Beanstalk?
Yeah, it was using games to incentivize real-world environmental behavior.
Interesting. And that obviously builds on your pedigree and your upbringing and your schooling. Well, not so much upbringing, but tell us a little bit about those early lessons from that first company that really helped to inform some smart decisions when building out Scalable, which we'll dig into. Yeah.
So I think it was kind of an invaluable education in all the things to do wrong at a startup. Because I think primarily, one, especially MySpace, which is like games they're called serious games, but they're like games to enable real world change or real world, interaction, real world positive change. So what was so interesting about that game that we built there was that it was really, it was a game where you would kind of log your environmental actions as you did them during the day. And get these credits. So you'd get, points and that were convertible to like different prizes and money and things like that. So it's kind of like a tokenized, now in like today's language, it was kind of like a tokenized environmental incentive system. But it was actually like kind of back in the day before people like really carried their phones and took pictures of everything. So now it's hard to remember. But at that time it was like, that was kind of a strange interaction. That was like a big behavioral change that we were trying to incentivize. So a lot of ways it was kind of before its time. But the biggest thing we learned through that is that, taking pictures of everything you do during the day, especially like when you recycle a bottle and stuff, it's really not that fun, right? It's like, it's not really a game, right? And so through that experience, like a chore. It's kind of like homework. It's kind of like a whole day of homework, and you get paid for it. So that's kind of the incentive, kind of like the token models. But yeah, it was really not fun. And through that experience, we talked to so many people in the serious game space, which were a lot of academics that were building games for different, like, serious purposes. And all the games sucked. Like, they were all so boring and so counter to...
Not really a game.
No, they were just so counter to the principles and game mechanics that make people play games for fun, right? People invest their free time to play games because they draw on so many of the, like, just natural, incentives that we have and just the pleasure of it. And so when we did this, this time around, when we were building a game for Scalable, that was so prevalent because there were so many, this is a very science heavy game. And so there were so many voices in the room that wanted to make like a really boring, academic type game. And it was so powerful that we'd already had the experience, gone down that road, and like knew what not to do.
So it's interesting. Do you consider, let's take it up a notch here. Do you consider that company and the project a failure?
No, I don't think it's a failure.
How do you rationalize it in your head? Yeah, how do you think about that? How do you put that into context for anyone out there with early companies that fail or don't get to the level that you expect them to? How do you frame that?
Actually, to be fully transparent, at the time, I did feel like it was a failure. Now, in retrospect, because I've used those learnings so powerfully, like it feels like that was such an accelerator for the thing that I actually ended up like kind of building my career on. But at the time, it felt extremely difficult.
I mean, it's almost like one of those cliche things you see all over LinkedIn and social media too. When early founders, when they have those first failures, of course it's detrimental at that moment. Your time, your energy, your expectations. But now, years later, you could take a look back at that. So I want to hit the rewind button for a second and just talk a little bit about your early experience, specifically at Virgin and Goldman Sachs, so those formative years for you. Looking back on it now, what would you say is one of those, tough lessons learned the hard way that, again, looking back on it in retrospect, like, thank God I went through that. Thank God I had that experience because it really helped form, who you are today as an individual and as an entrepreneur.
So I think most of the things that I, tried and the jobs that I kind of experimented with prior to startup life were really attempts to understand if a certain type of role or a certain type of company was really like fitting the my purpose. And, we could talk a little bit more about that. But so kind of all of those opportunities were really at the intersection of social impact and business. And so at Virgin, I was at the Virgin Foundation, doing social impact investing or, grant investing. And then at Goldman, I was really learning about the fundamentals of like, hardcore finance. And yeah, what I learned about those experiences is just kind of what I was really looking for. And also just kind of how I operate in how I can optimize my sort of like my efforts in the working world. I think a big thing was culture. So really at the foundation, and I had done a lot of like nonprofit foundation type work because generally I've always been interested in, social impact and policy and, all these sorts of things. And I found that environment, and not to dock this specific environment at all, because it's very indicative of every nonprofit environment that I've personally worked in. But it just, people weren't hungry. Like it wasn't like, it was like a very, it was kind of like a sleepy environment. And I found that like culturally,
that's kind of the antithesis of
startup world. Yeah. So it really just like sucked my energy out. And so that kind of like feels is really important to being able to like bring out your best self. Because there's some people that love that environment and startup world would stress them out so bad they wouldn't be productive. But for me personally, like I am so hard charging and driving, it would like get on people's nerves. I feel like I was like, just overdoing stuff, And I wanted to be in an environment where that is, where that's appreciated.
and it's so true too. I mean, I have this conversation, in my day job as a recruiter too. When I talk to candidates about those early jobs, I say, even though it didn't work out, even though you're not there anymore, think about what you learned there. You learn the most important thing about those early jobs is learning what you don't like, the functions of your job, the day to day, maybe that industry. Maybe you decide to pivot. And in your case, you understand that the culture really didn't jive with your personality and your drive and what you wanted to be. But I want to take one more step back and let's talk about another culture. What was it like working at the White House? How the heck did that happen? How did you fall into that?
So that was actually like pretty intentional. So I went to law school after business school. And while I was at Harvard Law, I was working on the research behind Scalable.
I'm sorry. Did you just drop something? Did you just drop something on the floor? I'd be proud of that too.
I mean, I could drop 3, but I'll stop.
We love it.
No, but I bring that up because, those professors had actually come from the White House. And so I was working with 2 professors, one of whom had been, the Secretary of Treasury, and the other one who had been the budget czar, if you will, under Obama. And so they actually helped sponsor and oversee my research that ultimately became Scoutable later on. And so they actually recommended me to go to the White House and actually enact a lot of the research that I was doing in the policy world, which is really where the idea started. The whole idea behind Scoutable started as a policy solution. And so that was my first time getting to work in policy and actually going to the Obama administration and getting to work at the National Economic Council.
Interesting. And what was one of those key takeaways from your experience, at the White House, from a cultural perspective, from a workflow, from just, working with the government? I mean, what was some of those things that you really walked away with? Geez, that I didn't really expect that.
Yeah. So it was interesting. I'd never worked in policy before, but I went to law school wanting to work in the government. That was kind of the goal because I did actually my experience with the environmental startup taught me that the thing that was missing from that concept was some sort of central organizing body that can actually dole out the incentives on a large scale, a national scale, a global scale, et cetera. And who's that central coordinating body? It's the government, right? It's taxes, it's policy, it's regulation, it's all of these different systems, all these different levers that you can pull in the game mechanics of society. And so that was really my interest in going into law and that my interest in policy as well. So what I found working at the White House, working in policy, was that is very true. You can use the spotlight of the government and the White House, especially, to scale solutions nationally, in very rapid time. And that was extremely exciting. And there are parts of it that are also very entrepreneurial, actually getting a policy proposal, through the White House and, up to actually getting enacted, is kind of a process. Yeah, it's a process of pitching this idea, showing your support for it to your investors, but their investors are not money. They are political, support. And so in a lot of ways I was like, this is very cool. This is very much like a startup environment, just, kind of in a different sphere. But what I also learned is that policy has almost no tolerance for failure. So there's no real experimentation that can be done there, right? A lot of times,
it's black and white, right?
Unless you have proof that it works already, then you can scale that solution, but you can't develop new things. You can't develop new tech and in the policy world. And so what I figured out through my experience was that very much for the space that I cared about and the research that I had done, there was a technology missing that needed to be invented. And we really looked all across the, HR space and across the the science space. And we found nobody that had actually developed this technology yet. Cause that was actually my original thesis is let's go find who built this thing that I'm proposing and scale that solution nationally. But it didn't exist yet. There. And then, so that's why, Mark Cuban came to me and said, Angela, let's build this thing. And I said,
it's so cool.
Let's go do it.
It's so cool. So, so the origin story is really the work you did with the National Economic Forum. It really fueled it. And I love the origin story. So let's dig into it. Let's hear this origin story of Scoutable and the journey that you've been on over the last couple of years.
Sure. So like I mentioned, the whole concept behind Scoutable really started as several years of research that I led at Harvard Law School, and some of the work I did at Harvard Business School as well, we're really studying the problem of hiring from a public policy perspective. And it was really driven by these findings that I was finding on kind of our success rates in the country in terms of being like accurately utilizing people. So if you look across the US economy, more than half of hires fail. That was so jaw-dropping to me.
It's a huge unnecessary number.
It was crazy. I was like, how can we, despite all of the time and resources and insanely smart people at all of our companies nationwide, have worse outcomes than if we randomly flipped a coin? I just couldn't believe it.
Like that.
I couldn't believe it. And I also just felt like, why aren't we talking about this? This is like an epidemic of insane proportions. Like, why aren't we talking about this? And so I was like, I really want to figure out what's going on here, because I can't just sleep on these numbers. This is a crisis. And so we started digging into that. And the craziest thing, this was like so mind blowing. Every research study that's ever been done on predicting future success on the job has shown the same criteria is the single most accurate hiring criteria known to exist, the single most unbiased hiring criteria known to exist, and the sole cause of around 90% of all failed hires. Yet, that data is not in the hiring process.
No.
Shocking. Like absolutely
Shocking.
Mind-blowing. So we can dig into that in a second, but kind of just to round out the story. So I was writing up all of this research, trying to figure out how do we actually change this? And I was proposing that a technology solution could actually fill in the gap on the missing data set, and allow, scale on this solution. But then I was going to policy. So then in the policy world, when I was at the Whitehouse, I was, kind of finishing up this book that I was writing on this topic and really trying to figure out how do we, where is this tech? Like who's built it? And let's find it and actually utilize it.
Let's source it out.
Right. And then realize that no one had built the tech. And so honestly, I was just so sad for the country. I was like,
there's got to be a solution.
I was like,
what are we going to do about this?
So insane. And nobody is talking about it. Nobody's looking at it. Nobody knows why they're unhappy in their jobs. What percentage of people are unhappy in their jobs? 85% of people. It's an insane number. The numbers just are mind blowing. So that was kind of the where I was trying to figure out I was going to write this book and hopefully someone would pick up the baton and, build this tech and go, save the world. A lot of that was also because I was very burnt out from the first startup. So it hadn't even crossed my mind really to actually build it.
And when how'd that light bulb go off? Was there a little birdie chirping in your ear that said, maybe you should put that book down and let's build this?
Yeah, there was. And his name's Mark Cuban. So when Mark learned about my research, he came to the White House for an entrepreneurship summit I was helping to organize. And we just really hit it off. He wanted to know everything about my research once he found out what I was working on. And it was just kind of one of those moments where, he saw something in me. He was really obsessed with this problem too. And by the end of that day, he was really like, Angela, you're not a wonk. You're an entrepreneur. He was like, you need to build the solution and I want to fund it.
How did that, let's take a step back for a second. There are a couple things. One of the things, and I had the opportunity because of you to meet Mark in person last April, and it was awesome and it was super cool. But he has something that makes him special, and it's a superpower of being so inquisitive and a problem solver and putting those pieces together. But the other piece is that he could see something in people that they may not see in themselves at that time. And that's what he did with you. Take us to that moment when you're like, holy shit, and the goosebumps and the light bulb went off and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to do this again. I'm jumping back in. I got to do this. Was it like that? Or was it let me sleep on this for a minute?
Oh yeah. No. So actually the craziest thing was, when Mark said this, I actually said no. I was like, Mark, I did a startup. It was really hard. And so here are the 5 reasons why I should not do this. And I just listed off the 5 reasons. But what really just floored me about Mark, and I think this is maybe indicative of how he knows my type so well, is I think like we're actually quite similar. He immediately shot down all 5 of those reasons for the counter argument that was in my own head too. I was kind of trying to put up a wall, and he was like, nope. And he said all the reasons. And I was like, wow, those are all the things that I would have also said as my counter arguments. And so I was like, even though we just met, I feel like we've known each other for a million years, and it really made me trust him. And he's been just the absolute best mentor and partner and friend in this journey.
Hey everybody, first I'd like to thank you all for spending time with me and my guest on the podcast. This show is my canvas to showcase amazing people from the world of recruiting, entrepreneurship, and leadership, and unpack their career journeys for everyone to learn from. But this show is also a business generator for me, as well as creating thought leadership and endless amazing content. And I've taken what I've learned in the past 3 years and over 200 recorded and 100 live shows and distilled it down into a digital playbook that I call the Pause Course. Now you could learn how I build, manage, and produce the podcast and use it to drive real business development and relationships. Today, I'm sharing all of my secrets behind the podcast, and you can get it all at thepausecourse.com. This course is for anyone, whether you're starting out or an advanced podcaster, you're using it for B2B and B2C. It's filled with all of my insights, learnings, tips, tricks, and templates. So get it now at thepausecourse.com and learn all my secrets. Thanks.
I want to ask one last question about Mark and close the chapter on that. What is that working relationship like? If we could pull back the curtain a little bit. I mean, this guy has his hand in so many things. I mean, it's literally changing the face of prescription medicine right now, which is so freaking needed and incredible.
Amazing.
Similar, like it's in this path of something that's like, it makes common sense. Like the reason prescription drugs are so high is because of shitty companies and inflation and greed. Let's cut all that out, cut the middleman out, and get to the source. But what is that like? I mean, how does this guy scale his time and his knowledge? What's it like working with him?
So that's an open question. Like, he's so responsive and so, he's always there when you need him. And he's like, I have not really experienced that with another investor in the same way. Like, he's just always there, always ready to help, always has like great ideas, great feedback, and really only like gets like upset at me for not like interacting with him more, like not asking for more stuff or not, getting his feedback on stuff. So, in a playful way, like he's just the best. I just think he's like, that's kind of his superpower, is that he is like, able to quickly jump between, strategies, jump between concepts, jump between like, I actually think like the switching cost for him of changing courses in the same like hour is like much lower than the usual person, to put it in my like psych speak. But
I mean, it's a different caliber. And lastly on Mark, I mean, what is that to this date with your relationship with him? What is that lesson learned from Mark Cuban?
Oh, so many. Because he has helped me. I think fundamentally we're quite similar, personality wise. But then he's helped me come out of my, some places where I would second guess myself or overthink. He's always like, Angela, you know this. Angela, you got this. Angela, let's go do this thing. Let's go on stage. Like, here, I got CNN's calling you. So he's just, he's been one. And I think also it's a function of, he has gone through these learning curves too, and so I really feel like, he can guide me, and I just look up to him in a way that is
such a mentor.
It's just very natural. Yeah.
That's awesome. And good on you for that. So I want to dig back into Scalable, because the first time I learned about it and I saw you present on stage with Mark and really understand what the product is. And one of the key pieces for me is how it takes bias out of the equation, which I'm a recruiter by trade. This is what I do every day. And it's so interesting too, because, and I talked about this recently, early on in my work as a recruiter, one of the firms I was working at, we did a blind bias study to see, as recruiters, when we're doing sourcing, what our bias is. And one of my biases, intentional or not, was if it wasn't a familiar looking, we'll call it a familiar looking name to me, if it looked like a foreign name to me, I'd be less inclined to source on that. And I was so happy that this got called to my attention, because I wasn't doing it consciously. And it was a small percentage. It wasn't anything over indexing, but I was able to course correct. And I think the biggest thing with bias and the training against that is understanding what your biases are and being open to it and not taking it so personally and deeply, but recognizing it that, hey, listen, I got to change something in my approach here. Let's talk a little bit about the Scalable product and the technology and how that really truly removes from the traditional looking at resumes and LinkedIn and profiles.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing is we actually know resumes and interviews don't predict job success, right? Because we use that today and we get more than half of the time we get the hire wrong. So it's not, and the bias that you're talking about, like the unconscious bias or conscious bias or whatever it is, it's actually not really it's not really it's not someone trying to be malicious. It's really just a function of how our brains operate. So our brains take in like all of this, like millions and millions of data points every second. And so we create these filters unconsciously to like quickly make decisions based on, all of this data so our heads don't explode.
It's how we protect ourselves too. It's how we protect ourselves.
Exactly. And so that's why interviews can actually be, and resumes can be so problematic. So the bias you're talking about is an extremely common one. There's so much research on it where actually, if they did a study where this exact same resume with a, kind of traditionally Caucasian sounding name versus a traditionally African-American sounding name, the African-American resume got 50% less callbacks. The exact same resume, right? And so this is just a function of people trying to use this very scant, poor data and try to proxy what their, assumptions are about, these different people. And it's just inaccurate. It's just bad data, right? Because it's the exact same resume. And then when you get to the interviews, guess how quickly we make our decisions in interviews? According to the research. Close, it's 10 seconds. So in the first 10 seconds, we make a decision, and the rest of the interview is basically just confirming that initial decision. It's almost 100%.
It's confirmation bias.
Evaluation. Exactly. And what do we learn in the first 10 seconds? We learn socioeconomic signals, gender, age, race, all the things that we don't want to select on. Judgments. That's the data we have in the first 10 seconds, and we can't change how our brain operates. And so really what I see as, such a big part of our solution is helping people gate out the bad data and only look at the best data possible. It's just been so amazing and wild, like that, the difference it makes. Like I can give an example. So kind of how our solution works.
Let's talk about this because I think it's really important here because we've been talking around it a little bit, but I want to tell everyone in the audience listening, let's break down, what Scalable is and how it works on both sides of the equation from the job seeker and then the hiring company.
Sure. So kind of the core technology we built, which our whole, platform is built around, is the first form of assessment that can measure all of this, this secret hiring criteria, this X factor that I'll dive into, for the very first time in hiring. So what this umbrella of things that all the research shows is the most predictive and most unbiased is the umbrella of things we call soft skills or psychometric traits or personality and cognitive abilities. So these traits, are, 2 times more predictive than interviews, 3 times more predictive than work experience, 4 times more predictive than education level, like the list goes on and on. So when I saw that when we were doing the research, my big question was, because I got my psychology degree, I said, well, we have tests that measure this. We've been measuring and quantifying these traits for decades. So why doesn't every company just use the available tests and have wildly predictive job outcomes?
Why not?
And the reason is, have you ever taken a personality test, for example?
They're awful.
Yeah. So, well,
because you're kind of thinking of what do I want to put down in the answer that I think they want to hear instead of truly the right thing, right? Like whatever you feel internally. It's crazy.
Exactly. So the context really matters. So the crazy thing is that those tests are extremely valid and accurate in an experimental setting. Because then the test taker has no incentive to give the wrong answer. So they actually give very honest, very transparent answers on these tests, which ask questions like, Adam, are you punctual or leisurely? at a party, are you a wallflower or do you talk to people? Have you ever stolen before? So people are actually
but obviously in a job
transparent.
interview, you want to say what you want them to hear, right? Like if you're putting the pressure of the context of a job interview, it's going to skew the whole results.
And that's exactly what we see. So when you ask those same questions in a competitive context like hiring, everyone scores way above the population norms on the good things and way below the population on the bad things. And so you really get no data at all. But that's the state of the science, or it was. And so there's really never been an instrument able to measure this most predictive data in the most valuable, place in our society, which is hiring. And so that's where I came up with a theory based on my psych research, like lab-based research, that I felt like we could build something that feels like a game that measures all of those, most important criteria without ever asking a self-reported question. And so that was the theory, and that's what we built. So that's kind of the core tech around Scalable is a 15-minute immersive, kind of like a movie where you're the protagonist. So, it's not like a hardcore shoot 'em up game or something where you need to have lots of gaming experience. We assume no gaming experience is required. But you take this 15-minute, interactive adventure. And by the end of it, we show you all of your natural strengths, that you may not even know you have yourself. So that was kind of the first, the first milestone was this tool that can unlock the most predictive data in hiring, but also help people understand what they bring to the table for themselves.
Love it. It's awesome. And I had the opportunity to go through it when we first met in April. I went back home and I tried it out and it's super cool. Give us a little state of the union from a couple of perspectives. I'm very interested to know how companies are successfully, adopting this and putting it into practice. And on the flip side of it, what has been some of the pushback as far as adoption?
Sure. So how we utilize it with companies is that what the game allows us to do is to actually build a very customized predictive model on who to hire for every single company and every single role. How we do that is we just have the existing employees at that company in that role play the game. And then we're able to show hiring managers exactly what's different about the best performers on the team than the average and lower performers on the same team. So for example, and then we go out and scout those people. We go find more people who have that set of scientific markers of better performance in this role, and showcase them to the company and get them hired. And so one example that was actually one of the first customers where we, when we launched this product, they did this exact process where they had their existing, sales team members play the game, and then what was crazy, and this actually is not uncommon, but theirs was very, very exaggerated. All of their top performers were like clones of each other on a certain subset of traits that we measure, which is exactly what we want to see, right? We're seeing here's the blueprint for better performance in this role, because it's extremely clear what the top performer profile is. Then we also looked at their bottom performers. And what we found is that their bottom performers were also clones of each other, but had almost no overlap with the top performers in that role. And so what's crazy is that those people got hired for the exact same role. So using resumes and interviews, you have no idea whether or not someone's going to be a top or bottom performer. But when you look at the data, it's extremely clear. This is the whole premise of the science. So then it gets more interesting. So then we went out and found candidates for this role. And we found a few people that were a great fit for the top performer profile. And, one person who was a clone and also had according to science, that was their hire. And it's super interesting because we then proposed, this person. We were like, oh, we found you this amazing, amazing person who's just like all your top performers. And it was really funny because you could just feel the resistance. They looked at that person's resume and they said,
something's not right.
We haven't had much luck with this kind of profile. And, in not so many words, we were talking about demographic differences that were, right. And so it's not, again, I think it's not malicious on anyone's part. It's just your experience and how you are, the heuristic you're using on the data, right? And so what I said is, just interview them. Just interview them, even just for our own edification, so we can refine the search, because the data's telling us this is your person, but we want to know like exactly why
scientific purposes. So
we said, just interview them. And we gave them one person first, just for, I knew they didn't put in comparison. So then, they did this interview and they called me afterward and they said, Angela, we hired her on the spot. Yes, but this is exactly what we learned through kind of a bit of the journey, is that the resistance is still quite strong. And so we had a version where we would actually let companies use the technology self-service as an assessment. We realized that like at the end of the day, it's very difficult to like not default to your decision-making that you've been doing, even though it's not working. And so what we found is that this iteration where we actually like make the matches, help companies like pick who to hire, has been so wildly successful. And, this company said that they typically interviewed 8 to 10 people for every one of those headcounts and would sometimes not find anyone they liked. And, we found them in, 2, but we found them in one, one.
And what's great about it too is like all the ancillary benefits too. I mean, we're not just talking about finding a great hire, but we're talking about reducing time to hire, which is incredible in this marketplace, reducing cost to hire. And
Absolutely.
You know what? There's technology like this that could put people like me out of business. And I'm fine with that if it's reducing bias in the market. I mean, it's really a super high quality product. From a business perspective, where are you at now? I mean, what's the next milestone and what's the next hurdle that you guys are looking to jump over?
Yeah. So from a business standpoint, right now, we were just really trying to grow our customer base and have all of these different sort of examples and stories to help share. I think what we do, I think the biggest hurdle is just educating the market on the fact that this exists and is completely different than how you hire today. Even though I think on the company side, it shouldn't feel different. It should feel like, hey, you wanted to hire, you told us your requirements, we brought you people, and your team did a little assessment. But on our side, it's so wildly different than traditional hiring that it's really about helping to spread the word.
I love it. And hopefully this show does that too. So quick question for anyone out there, because I know I have a lot of people in talent acquisition, HR, people management too. Where would this sit in the process? Would this be, after someone applies and the company, because it's weird, right? Because I would say, is it right during the application and before it even gets to a human making a decision, which would take the bias out of it, or someone looking at it and saying, yes, I want to give him the assessment? I would say it's before if you want to do it the right way. No?
So we do it we recommend, and when we apply it, it's the very first step. And it's for the reason you were just implying, where typically the resume screen is the first step, and companies cut 75 to 98% of candidates based solely on the resume. But we know the resume doesn't predict job performance. So you actually are making the biggest cut in your funnel based on zero data. And so what happens if you have people play the game and actually do the assessment as the first step is that there are people in the funnel that you would have never even looked at their resume who might be the perfect fit for the role. I can share another story on that if you like.
So smart.
Yeah.
Sure. Real quick, please.
Yeah. So this is one that, has just been very eye-opening for people. And it's one that I love as well. But we had a company hiring for an engineering role, and they had top applicants from, we did the same process, had their top engineers play the game. And then they had applications from, computer science grads at MIT and Stanford and all the, top schools.
Top of the top.
But then the number one, person that indexed above everyone else in terms of fit to that company's specific set of amazing engineers, was a full-time auto technician who had never gone to college, never even worked in an office before, and had taught himself to code.
Amazing.
And they hired him, and he ended up being, just an absolute superstar and, leader at the company.
There's nothing more I want to see than this technology, and not just the technology, but the thought behind it and the reason behind it really be adopted and widespread across the industry. And I absolutely love it. So Angela, let's bring it home here. But before I do so, as somebody who's a thought leader in this space, quick hot take on the current state of the labor market right now. When we think about the economy, we think about the great migration, the great recession, the great reallocation, whatever the heck you want to call it. What's your quick hot take on the current labor market?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I kind of predicted a long time ago, is that there's going to be this crisis of one. I think it's a crisis of purpose in our generation. Like, people don't want to just slave away at a job and kind of pay their dues like in previous generations. In our generation, people really care, and I'd say Gen Z even more. People really care about what they're contributing to the world and making the best utilization of their time and talents, because there's so much opportunity now. Like, the technology and the internet's opened up all of these worlds of opportunity and side hustles and all of these different things. And so I think that's what's driving this great recession, or the great, what's it called? Great reallocation.
Migration, resignation.
So,
I call
whatever.
it
the great resignation.
I'm calling it actually, based on what you just said, I'm calling it the great reallocation. Right?
Yeah.
We're reallocating where people work by self-choice.
Well, we need to reallocate. That's our mission. We're trying to lead the great reallocation. maybe that's
I love it. And Angela, first and foremost, I want to thank you for your time before I bring it home with my last two questions here. And having conversations with folks like yourself really just fuel me and everything that I do in this industry and why I do the show. So, Angela, what is the single greatest piece of advice you've ever received that you take action on daily?
I'd say there's two parts to that. One is something that I really learned from my mother. This is something that was really ingrained in me growing up, but it's that there is absolutely nothing you can't learn. And so I truly believe that. And that's been a real, a real mantra for me, especially in the startup journey, where, especially as CEO of a startup, like every 6 months, your job is completely different. And I'm learning a whole new domain of skill sets, because you have to learn it before you can really hire for it. And so I truly believe that. And that sort of like growth mindset has really helped me, I think, in my path. So yeah, I think there's truly nothing that I can't learn. And I think that's true of most people. It's just whether or not they believe it. And then the other thing is actually advice Mark gave to me at a very difficult moment. And he was like, I'll save the rest of the story, but he was just like, Angela, if anyone could do it, it was you. And I was like, I can do it. If anyone could do it, it is me. And I can do it, And so every time things start to get low, I just start to remember like my mission and my responsibility, the feeling of responsibility for getting this technology out in the world.
Awesome. Good stuff. And last but not least, you look back on your life and you look back on your career and what you've built so far, and you think about those tough times, those really hard times when you really had to dig down deep and harness that inner tenacity that all great entrepreneurs have, and what Mark Cuban sees in you. And on the flip side of that, when you want to show gratitude and appreciation for everything you have built and everything that you're building and the difference that you're making in this world. Angela, Antony, what is your focus? What is your compass? What is your North Star in life?
So it's actually quite interesting, because I think my focus and what I am out here in the world to do is to actually contribute my purpose. And I truly feel that Scalable is it. It's like this combination of things that I'm uniquely good at, things that I deeply, deeply care about, and things that the world needs. And that's actually the entire framework. If you think of that, about those three things like a Venn diagram, strengths, things that you're good at, things that you love, and things that the world needs. That's the entire framework of the entire Scalable product and the entire Scalable ecosystem. And we're helping everyone find that intersection. And I truly think my intersection is Scalable.
I love it. That's how we do it here, folks. This is what I'm talking about. This is what the show is all about. Angela, I want to thank you for joining me. I want to thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your time. And thank you for what you're doing to make the employment, labor, whatever the heck you want to call it, what we do in this world, helping people be in the right jobs, right? I want everyone to find out more. You can check out at scoutable.com. We're going to link it up in the show links. Angela, where else could folks connect with you? Where could they learn more?
Yeah, no, scoutable.com is great. And you can also DM me on all of the platforms. I'm just at Angela Antony everywhere. So love to continue the conversation. And if any employers are interested, on the site, you can sign up for the free team assessment, and we can actually try out the assessment with your team.
Awesome. Good stuff. Hang with me one moment here. And everyone listening, this is what the show is all about. This is the good stuff. Bring it back to the roots. You know where to find out more at thepodcast.com. Remember, follow us on all the social media channels and take care of each other. Look out for one another and catch us next week for another great episode of the podcast. Take care, everybody.
Wisdom is forever, but for us, it's time to go. Thank you for joining us. Luckily, we'll be back with our next episode soon, jam-packed with more incredible humans. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing. To join the conversation, search the podcast on LinkedIn. And to catch up on past episodes and more info, please visit www.thepodcast.com.